This pot-bellied, bald man was actually a rich second generation. His name was Kenny Wells, born to a family of mine owners. Unfortunately for him, by his generation, the family business was in decline, with the company's stock worth a mere 4 cents a share. He went to investors, but they wouldn't even see him. Yet, no one could have predicted that soon his company's market value would skyrocket past tens of billions of dollars, driving all of Wall Street into a frenzy. Equally unexpected was that his $10 billion fortune originated from a dream. In his dream, he found himself in a jungle where many workers were mining for him. The person directing them was named Michael Acosta, a geologist who had once discovered the largest copper mine in Southeast Asia. Michael and Wells had a brief encounter in reality. Upon waking, Wells felt this dream was a divine revelation. He found Michael's contact information, pawned the gold watch he'd intended for his wife, and with his entire savings, resolutely flew to Indonesia. There, he met Michael. Once a star in the industry, Michael was also in a slump. After a series of failed explorations, no one believed his theories anymore. These two industry cast-offs, two losers, hit it off immediately. Wells would provide the money, and Michael would find the location. They were going to make everyone who had looked down on them eat their words. Michael took Wells to a spot he had previously identified. Wells looked around, utterly stunned. It was exactly like the scene he had seen in his dream. This further solidified his resolve. Wells grabbed a napkin, scribbled a 50-50 contract on it. They both signed their names, shook hands, and got to work. First, Wells used Michael's legendary past as a selling point to attract small investments, successfully raising the $260,000 startup capital. They bought drilling equipment and immediately hired local workers to dig day and night. Then, they sent the excavated samples to the lab for testing to see if there was any gold. But things didn't go as smoothly as they had imagined. Test reports kept coming back 1, 2, 3 times, and the results were getting worse each time. Soon, the startup funds dwindled, and they couldn't even pay wages. Workers left one after another, and no amount of persuasion could stop them. Wells lay helplessly in the mud, the cold, icy rain slapping his face haphazardly. And worse was yet to come. Wells contracted severe malaria and was on the verge of death in bed. Before losing consciousness, he took out the last $2,300 he had and made a final request to Michael, not wanting to die without achieving anything. His words touched Michael. They had nowhere left to retreat. Michael began visiting every worker, learning that they all had a common problem: drinking water. So, he used the $2,300 to buy a water filter. As a trade, he convinced the workers to return, and work resumed. Weeks passed, and when Wells finally woke up, he found Michael sitting beside him with a serious expression. It turned out Michael was playing a joke on him. Having narrowly escaped death, Wells finally received good news. The test report showed that the area they were digging had 8 ounces of gold per ton of ore, which meant they had found a gold mine with huge reserves. The two men hugged tightly. They were really going to strike it rich this time. However, the story had only just begun. What happens when a penniless nobody suddenly becomes a billionaire? Blonde beauties cast flirtatious glances and initiating conversations, appearing serious on the surface, while engaging in all sorts of suggestive actions under the table. Just recently, Wells had discovered an astonishingly large gold mine in Indonesia, and when he returned to America with the assay reports, all of Wall Street went wild. Investors who had once looked down on him now humbly served him coffee. Big shots personally came asking to subscribe to their company's stock, and all employees became millionaires overnight. To prove the value of the gold mine, he invited investors from all sides to Indonesia to observe the entire mining process, even personally panning for gold in the river. Seeing the gold they had panned themselves, the investors no longer had any doubts about Wells. His company quickly went public on the New York Stock Exchange with a valuation of $17 billion, and the stock price soared like a rocket. Becoming a billionaire, Wells hosted lavish parties every night, and countless financial elites tried to curry favor with him. But what he didn't know was that these capitalists had long been secretly waiting to see Wells make a fool of himself. Soon after, through an investor's introduction, Wells met a real tycoon. This man controlled a vast amount of gold, and Wells's gold mine became his target. However, the proposal the tycoon offered didn't include Wells's and Michael's names. He planned to pay $300 million in cash to directly buy out their gold mine. Wells was furious upon learning this. Although it was money he couldn't spend in several lifetimes, developing a gold mine was a dream he had inherited from his father's generation. If dreams could be sold, what difference would he have from salted fish? Faced with $300 million in his dream, Wells resolutely chose his dream. But rashly going against a major capitalist usually doesn't end well. He soon tasted the bitterness. The tycoon simply used his connections, and the Indonesian president himself stepped in, sending troops to seal off the entire gold mine and revoke their mining license. The hard-earned wealth slipped away just like that. Wells began to regret it. Since the gold mine was confiscated, the company's stock price instantly shrank by 50%, and he was once again on the verge of bankruptcy. Drowning his sorrows in alcohol every day, completely losing his fighting spirit. Upon hearing this, Michael rushed to America overnight. Seeing Wells in such a state, he couldn't help but give him a dressing down. This beating, however, woke Wells up. This gold mine was something he and Michael had risked their lives for. How could they just let it be taken away by capitalists? Wells pulled himself together. No matter what, they had to win back their gold mine. Michael came up with an idea. They would target the Indonesian president's son, a playboy who lost money on every investment and desperately needed to prove himself to his father. If they could get him on board, they could get the mining rights back from the Indonesian government. But gaining the young master's trust was easier said than done. To test Wells's courage, the young master actually asked him to touch this animal. Looking at the ferocious tiger in front of him, Wells not only didn't run, but bravely walked towards it step by step. He slowly reached out his hand, and sensing that the tiger didn't intend to attack, Wells grew bolder. He actually placed his hand on the tiger's head and petted it. The young master was moved by Wells's reckless courage, and the collaboration was settled. But Wells only had 15% of the mining rights. Sounds a bit small, doesn't it? What is 15% of $30 billion? Still think it's small? Wells returned to his peak, and the stock price soared again. The Mining Association decided to award Wells the Golden Pickaxe Award, the Nobel Prize of the mining industry. At the award ceremony, Wells was filled with emotion. After experiencing great ups and downs, his dream had finally come true at this moment. However, when Wells woke up the next day, he realized that the ups and downs of life were indeed too rapid. As soon as he arrived at his company's entrance, he saw a large group of people protesting and demanding repayment, and he was even punched to the ground. Back in his office, he learned what had happened. It turned out that after testing by a third-party institution, there was no gold in their gold mine at all. Someone had secretly sprinkled gold dust into the samples sent for testing, falsifying the results. Wells also learned that his friend Michael had sold all his shares the day before, cashing out $164 million, and then vanished. It didn't take a genius to figure out that this was a scam orchestrated entirely by Michael. A large number of shareholders began selling their stock, and the New York Stock Exchange suspended trading of Wells's company. The $17 billion market value evaporated overnight. Wells was once again penniless and was now considered a con artist by the whole world. Wherever he went, angry shareholders would surround him, and even the hotel was urging him to settle his bill. And when he returned to his room, 3 FBI investigators were already waiting for him. From them, Wells learned that after Michael fled back to Indonesia with the money, he was immediately arrested by the military and then jumped out of a helicopter. When the military found his body in the jungle, his hands and face had been eaten by wild boars. The Indonesian police hastily closed the case, concluding that Michael was dead and cremating him. The $164 million was nowhere to be found, and the FBI suspected Wells was also involved in the scam. Looking at his current miserable state, he looked anything but a con artist. He seemed more like a victim, and there was no evidence indicating that he had benefited in any way from this case. Helpless, the FBI had no choice but to release him without charge. Penniless, Wells returned home from the luxurious hotel. Although Wells had once lost himself in a world of extravagance, his wife still chose to accept him. Then, she handed him a stack of letters he had received during this time. One envelope caught his attention. Inside was the napkin contract he and Michael had drafted, clearly stating a 50-50 split. And there was also a check for $82 million, exactly half of $164 million. Seeing the check, Wells revealed a meaningful smile. This movie is called Gold, and it's based on a true story. Wells wasn't a victim. He and Michael together fleeced Wall Street. The story is modeled after the infamous 1993 Bre-X gold mining company fraud case. Through the methods described in the movie, they created the illusion of extremely high gold content in the ore. The company's stock price soared from 25 cents to $200. A company with no revenue or profit records became one of the most successful listed companies in Canadian history by selling a completely fabricated story. As long as there was a chance to get rich, no one cared about the truth. Just like during the entire gold mining process in the movie, there were doubts everywhere, yet no one noticed. Because the real gold mine was never in some jungle, at the foot of some mountain, or in some river, but right there on Wall Street. Alright, that's the end of today's story. If you have any thoughts on this film, please leave a comment below. And make sure you subscribe to catch more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next one.